Greetings, Richard Filmer here, and welcome to another edition of Richard's Rock Rambles. So today, before we go on to our featured band, I thought I must just give a very short tribute to one of the great rock drummers who sadly passed away on Saturday at the age of 73. Of course, I'm talking about Lee Kerslake, the great British drummer who had a pretty long career. Started in bands like Tofat and the Gods. He then joined Uriah Heep along with Ken Hensley, who was originally in the Gods with him. And he joined them for their album Demons and Wizards, which of course was one of their biggest sellers. And he was with that band right up in the mid-70s, early 70s, their great classic period. He then left the band for a while and he rejoined them in the 80s. And I think he left them again in 2007 due to health reasons. He had all sorts of issues with arthritis and what have you. A great drummer. Him and Gary Thane, who sadly also passed away, were a really good rhythm section, had a great feel for each other. Plus, he was very good on backing vocals, Lee Kerslake, and he did some songwriting as well for Uriah Heep. So an all-round great musician, very talented drummer, and by all accounts a really nice guy as well. Very humble, no rock star issues with him. As I said, he played for Uriah Heep. Then he also joined a one-off band called Living Loud, and that was, I think, in the early 2000s or in the 90s. I must check. I've got it here. I'll show you just now. So let's have a look at a couple of the albums that he appears on. As I said, Uriah Heep's Demons and Wizards. Fantastic album. There were some great hits off this one. The Wizard, Traveler in Time, Easy Living, which was a big hit for them. Poets Justice, Circle of Hands, Rainbow Demon, which is one of my favorite Uriah Heep tracks. Let's see if I can find a photograph inside. Yeah, there's not very clear photographs, but that's the band in the studio and what have you. So that was the first album that he appeared on, making his mark with Uriah Heep. I think they'd gone through about 2 or 3 drummers before him, and they certainly got the right one when he came along. He also featured on the follow-up one called Magician's Birthday. In fact, the title track is a great drum piece. I think it's about 5 minutes into the song, 5 minutes, 21 seconds, something like that, where him and Mick Box on guitar trade off each other. Amazing stuff. So yeah, that was the second one he appeared on. And as I said, he appeared on many others: Sweet Freedom, Wonderworld, High and Mighty, Return to Fantasy, lots of albums. Abominog in the 80s, and then in 2007 he retired. As I said, he also was in a band called Living Loud. They only made one album. There is a DVD available as well, which is this one here. It's got some notable guys in the band. So you've got Lee Kerslake on drums, Don Airey on keyboards, the current Deep Purple keyboardist, Jimmy Barnes on vocals, great singer. I think he was with a band called Cold Chisel. Bob Daisley on bass. He, of course, was with Widowmaker right in the beginning and then with Rainbow. And Steve Morse on guitar. And, of course, he's the current Deep Purple guitarist, has been with them for over 15 years now, I think. And what they do with this is they redid a couple of the songs that Lee Kerslake played. Of course, I forgot to mention, Lee Kerslake played on the first 2 Ozzy Osbourne albums, Blizzard of Oz and Diary of a Madman, which for me is Ozzy at his best. I don't think he's ever bettered those 2 albums. And on those 2, they had Bob Daisley on bass and Lee Kerslake on drums. Great rhythm section. So what they did here was they redid some of those tracks, like Flying High again from Diary of a Madman, Crazy Train from Blizzard of Oz, and I Don't Know. Tonight, also Mr. Crowley. Just different versions of those classic tracks. Of course, Randy Rhoads was the original guitarist, but done pretty well here by Steve Morse, who's no slouch on the guitar either. So that was the other band that he played in. A great loss to the music world, I think, and Unfortunately, we're getting a lot of guys in their late 60s, early 70s who have had health issues, who it seems like every day there's another one who's passed away. So that whole generation seems to be dying out now. Really sad, because you kind of wonder who's going to be replacing them. Is there anybody to replace them? We shall have to wait and see. Okay, so today's band that we're going to chat about is another band who perhaps should have been a little bigger than what they were. Be it because of where they came from, they weren't that well known, they didn't get the right push from the record companies, they weren't supported enough, maybe their look wasn't quite what the Americans were looking for, because of course in those days, even today, if you don't crack the States, then you don't make it. You might be big in Europe or in England, but if you don't crack the States, you can tour for 6 months of the year alone, then you don't quite make it, and that was certainly the case in the 70s. So we're looking at a band from Wales by the name of Budgie. If you haven't heard of these guys before, I urge you to check them out. If you're looking for their early sound, although they did change it towards the 80s, was very much in the Sabbath mold. A lot of heavy riffs, upfront bass work, power trio stuff, but with a more of a Sabbath feel to them. And for my money, the first couple of albums were as heavy as anything Sabbath did in the early days. Just didn't quite get to the same level as Sabbath or Purple or Zeppelin. Uriah Heep, the big five, if you like. So as I said, they formed in Cardiff, Wales in 1967. The original lineup consisted of Burke Shelley on vocals and bass. His vocal style takes some getting used to. It's very similar to Geddy Lee of Rush, very high-pitched voice. He could also at sometimes sound like a bit like Robert Plant, but it does take some getting used to. But a great bass player as well. A guy by the name of Tony Burge, I'm not quite sure how you pronounce that, on guitar and vocals. He would be with them during their early period. He did leave later on and was replaced by a couple of different guitarists. And the original drummer's name was Ray Phillips. So, as I said, very heavy power trio stuff. The first album, the production is a bit muddy. I would have liked him to have been a bit clearer, just to hear the different instruments. But I suppose that was the kind of sound they were going for. There were a number of other members. Pete Boot on drums, I think he was the second drummer. Steve Williams on drums, I think he was the guy right up at the end. John Thomas on guitar. And right at the end, a gentleman by the name of Craig Goldie on guitar. Some of you guys might recognize that name. He, I think, played with Dio on a number of albums. So all in all, they made 11 studio albums. 5 live albums, of which I have one. And there are a couple of compilations, and there's one EP, which I think did pretty well for them. As far as I'm aware, there's no official Budgie DVD. I think there's some stuff out on YouTube and maybe some unofficial live recordings or parts of compilations, but there's never been an official live DVD, which is a shame, because I'm pretty sure they must have filmed them in their heyday back in the 70s. But as with many things, sometimes these things are caught up with lawyers and they don't get released because of this, that, and the other. But here's hoping one day that'll happen. So I've got all the studio albums, one of the few bands that I've actually got the complete collection. I collected these many years ago. I was very lucky to get a couple which were actually picture discs, which I'll show you in a moment. So let's go to the very first album then. The one called Budgie, self-titled. Great cover art. I love some of these covers. If I'm not mistaken, some of them, I think the later ones are done by Roger Dean, the famous artist. And there's a picture of the band at the back. There's Burke Shelley. It's Tony Burge. And that was the first drummer. What was his name? Ray Phillips. That's Ray Phillips over there. This album is extremely heavy. As you can see, that's the picture disc, which is quite cool. So let's have a look here. Gee, this writing is so small. That's the only thing I hate about CDs. You need a microscope to be able to read this writing. This is crazy. So I think the first, here we go. Guts, that's a really heavy track. Slow, plodding. The Author, that's a good track. You and I. It takes a while to get into this album. It's not as accessible as some of the later ones because of its heaviness and the production. But if you're in that mood, I would suggest you stick this one on. Okay, so that's the first one. Then we moved on to an album which I think really did well for them. Made their mark, one called Squawk. That is a Roger Dean cover. You can see his artwork, and then at the back, there's a picture of the band. And this came out in 1972. Some great tracks in here. Whiskey River, Rocking Man, Hot as a Docker's Armpit. These acts had some strange song titles, seriously. Drugstore Woman is a good track. Bottled, Young is a World, and Stranded. Not much in the inside. Great album. Some really good guitar work from Tony Borge. You know, sometimes with a power trio, you really need the guitarist to stand out. And I think he had his own sound, Tony Borge. Really nice sound. And of course, the rhythm section is pretty good. So that was the second one, Squawk. Then we go on to one of my favorite albums, Never Turn Your Back on a Friend. Also a Roger Dean artwork there. Ray Phillips, Burke Shelley, and Tony Borge. Still the same lineup. Possibly their biggest hit ever, Bread Fan. That was their first big hit. That's the first track on here. Quite an up-tempo, great riff to that. Baby Please Don't Go, which of course has been covered by a gazillion people. They do quite a good version on here. You're the Biggest Thing Since Powdered Milk. Another great title. In the Grip of a Tire Fitter's Hand. That's also a great track. Another good title. Riding My Nightmare, which is more of a mellow track. And Parents, which is a long song. I think it's about 10 minutes long. Great slow build up to that track with some nice acoustic work as well. So that's Never Turn Your Back on a Friend. One I can recommend. If you haven't checked Budgie out before, that's the one to check out. Please excuse me. Apologies for that. The vagaries of recording at home. Okay, so now we move on to another album which was extremely heavy, and one which was later on covered by none other than Metallica, a couple of the tracks. I think they also did Bread Fan from the previous album. In for the Kill. A really good album. My favorite tracks on here are Crash Course in Brain Surgery, In for the Kill, the title track, Wondering What Everyone Knows. That's a slow track which builds as well. What else is on here? Small Writing. Hammer and Tongs, nice heavy track as well. Yeah, there's a picture of the band at the back. It's another one worthwhile checking out. Then we move on to an album called Bandolier. And this one, I think, featured a different drummer. If I can find out who this was. This was Steve Williams. He was also from Wales on drums. And that was in 1975, Bandolier. Nice album. A bit more mellow than some of the earlier ones. Breaking All the House Rules is a good rocking track. I Can't See My Feelings, that's another very good track. And Napoleon Bonaparte 1 and Napoleon Bonaparte 2. Very clever play on words there for that last track. Also very long track, builds up different parts to it, which is cool. Yeah, here's the guys at the back. Burke Shelley. I think one of the reasons they never really cracked the States was their look. You know, they didn't have the Aerosmith rock star look. I mean, Burke Shelley looked like somebody's granny. And I have a feeling that was one of the things that went against them. But anyway, good album nonetheless. Excuse me, I just want to wet the whistle. Right, then we go on to If I Were Britannia, I'd Waive the Rules. Clever play on words there. Another interesting cover. 3 budgies flying with weapons on their backs. Anna Negan, good track. The title track, If I Was Britannia, I'd Waive the Rules. Heaven Knows Our Name. And Black Velvet Stallion, which is slow, plodding track with a repetitive bass line, but it's really clever. Good track as well. That's that one there. Then we move on to one called, not the best cover in the world, one called Impeccable. And at the back we have the budgie flying away with a cat in its claws. I sometimes wonder these guys, it might have been due to budget constraints that, they don't have the best covers in the world. Anyway, Melt the Ice Away. This is with Steve Williams on drums. Love for You and Me, All at Sea, Don't Go Away, Don't Dilute the Water. I think that was quite a good track. It was quite a long 6 minutes and 13 seconds. That was one of the better tracks on this album. A lot mellower than the early stuff. I think they were trying to embrace a bigger market, appeal to a bigger market, I should say. But after repeated listens, this one, it grows on you. Then we go on to Power Supply, not my favorite budgie album. The production on here is very tinny. I think it's got that sort of 80s sound. I think this was out 1980. Yeah, it's got that. I don't know why. Most rock albums that were produced in the 80s, the drum sound was just not right, especially when you have a power trio. You don't want a tinny drum sound. Not too many great tracks on here. Forearm Smash was quite a heavy track. Heavy Revolution. Not much else for this one. These are all, by the way, released on the Repertoire label, which is a great German label. And they released some notable albums. Just trying to think what else. Some 10 years after, I think there was a band called Nirvana, not the Nirvana from the 90s, the earlier Nirvana, Spyro Gyro, a whole bunch of Warhorse, the first 2 Warhorse, only Warhorse albums. It's also on Repertoire. So it's a great label to find these things on. The next one is called Night Flight. Interesting cover there. And this one features a track called I Turn to Stone, which is 6 minutes and 8, which is a really good hard rocker. Change Your Ways, Superstar, She Used Me Up. Not a bad album, but you can see they were trying to appeal to the new wave of British heavy metal guys, and I think that's how they that was the new audience they were trying to attract. And I think to a certain extent they got that right. For me, the productions are just not as good as some of those early ones, like In for the Kill. It's a bit too 80s production for me. Another album I'm not a big fan of, Deliver Us From Evil. This one here. And there's the guys at the back. Not much to go. Don't Cry. Bored with Russia is okay. Not a great album. If you want to jump into budgie stuff, I would really recommend the first 4 or 5. The later ones take some getting used to, mainly because of the production, which isn't fantastic. So that was them for a while, and then lo and behold, in 2006, they come out with another album. So there was this huge gap. I know Burke Shelley had been dealing with health issues. He had an aneurysm, I think. So he wasn't doing too great, and people were leaving and doing other things. So they came out with an album called You're All Living in Cuckoo Land. Another strange cover. A good idea, but it never really came off. I mean, there's no memorable songs on here. There's nothing that sticks in your head. In fact, I can't think of anything on here that stands out. Love Is Enough, the title track perhaps. Simon Lease on guitar and vocals. I'm not quite sure who. where he's from. Steve Williams still on drums, and obviously Burke Shelley, the one constant within the band. So that was that would be their last studio album. As far as I'm aware, they haven't done anything since. And obviously now with COVID, nobody touring or recording much. I think that's pretty much it for Budgie. As I said, I do have one of their live albums. This is a Radio Sessions 1974 and 1978. There are a couple of others that I don't have. The 1974 sound on here is not great. I don't think there was much done with the mixing or what have you. Bread Fans on there, Hammer and Tongs, Zoom Club. So there's a lot of stuff from In For The Kill. I think this was the In For The Kill tour. And then there's one from 78 in Los Angeles. Melt the Ice Away, Smile Boy Smile, In For The Kill, Parents, Don't Dilute the Water. So I think that was the Impeccable tour. And yeah, worth checking out these live ones, simply to get a snapshot of what the guy sounded like back in the 70s. So there's that one. So that's it for Budgie. An interesting band, great power trio, heavy stuff in the beginning, as I said, and they mellowed out towards the 80s. But worth checking out if you like that kind of sound. Some quite memorable tracks, interesting song titles. Just never quite made it in the States, and I think that was their biggest downfall. Also, there were a few lineup changes, issues within the band, as usual with guys. So, yeah, check them out if you haven't. And if you are a collector, maybe go back and revisit. So, for the next couple of videos, I think I'll be finishing up with this particular subject, bands that didn't quite make it, and then we're going to move on to something else. So, yeah, hope you guys have a good week, and keep on rocking. Cheers.